Hello, good afternoon, welcome. Haven't done a stream since last week, but luckily for a change, when I managed to be away from the keyboard again, the market hasn't actually done anything. So this is just hopefully going to be a quick update, just based on what I said last week and some new observations and things like that, and some new possible entries I put in. Yeah, so I'll just get started quickly. Bitcoin, yeah. So as I said last week, we are 61 fib monthly supply. We've nailed my alert that I had there, but obviously price hasn't gone very far since then. And yeah, so just still waiting to see. It's made a daily demand today, but a very weak one, and we don't have the same on CME, and Korea didn't. I think Korea might have made it by a hair, but I haven't been drawn it. It's so tight. Um, US dollar dominance is still consolidating on that 8 hour level. And yeah, we just don't really have anything definitive. Obviously, it looked like we were going to spike up and drop down yesterday, which did happen, but didn't drop very far and then came right back up again. So yeah, at the moment on Bitcoin, just still really waiting it out. My bias remains the same. We're in monthly supply, so I don't want to be long biased right here. If you got in lower down, that's great. If you didn't, then it's waiting it out. And there were a lot of people asking about that yesterday and sort of getting FOMO and things like that. And I'm like, well, you can get FOMO if you like, but what's if you entered here, apart from it being low probability, what's your risk to reward? Like, where's your stop? If you want to enter here with your stop just below the range, that's fine. Um, but I just think there are other more highly probable things to trade. So on the long side, again, I haven't changed the entries that I had previously. We do now have kind of a slightly dubious weekly demand. So we did obviously close above this level. It's a double candle, so it's not necessarily the strongest. It's spread. Um, but so I haven't put an alert on the top there. And I've left the alert as at the daily level that got just missed underneath these wicks. Now we could get a bounce higher, but again, like for me, that's not necessarily higher probability. But you can look here, from what's that, 85 and a half 85.3 downwards, to see if any of this area gets a bounce. I haven't actually even fibbed it, so I think I did fib it for the lower, but I like to I get distracted on fibs. So yeah, that entry is around the 61 at this stage, but I've been known to fib things excessively, and then it keeps pushing up, and you keep having to move the fib. So at the moment, I'm just leaving it until I see some structure that actually tells me this might fall. Um, yeah, so to the downside, firstly that daily level that just got missed. Then secondly, I think there's an 8 hour in there a little bit lower. Um, and while obviously this looks strong, we have had a lot of ETF buying. ETFs are kind of interesting, actually. Let me just show you that quickly. So ETFs, I'm not really sure what's going on. Like the data is so hard now because I feel like it was quite well aligned across my three sources before, but it just got progressively less so. But obviously, we've had strong buying going on up until yesterday, shown on this far side source. But then we had some big selling coming in off ARC yesterday, and a little bit off the others, and also possibly off GBTC. And I don't know, but this data takes some time to get updated. Um, so I'm not sure if this is complete yet. But I'll show you why in a second. And the same with BlackRock. It's got 970 million supposedly on this source. So that makes still a net buy of yesterday of 591. On my second source, it's not updated yet, so you can see there's all these. So I can't see really what's happened, and this has got some selling on Bitwise, 223 Bitcoin. Let me see if that aligns. So Bitwise is this column. So yeah, 21 million, around 23, maybe a little bit broadly the same. 223 Bitcoin, broadly the same. But the thing is, then when I go to the Arkham data set, so this dashboard that Arkham have, firstly, if I look yesterday at BlackRock, so yes, we did have some buying here, 300 BTC four times at 122, but then if I add up the millions here, there's 30, 60, 90, 120, 130 million, which is not even close to the 960 million, 970 million that's shown by Farside. So I'm not sure what to make of that and like what's reliable, but either this is vastly over egged or this is vastly under. and I've been told Arkham is the data set. But the difficulty is I don't know where the far side data or the other source comes from. Like they say, I think far side says the above table is generated automatically, but automatically from where I have no idea. And I think this data set doesn't even say where it's generated from. So the reliability, I'm not sure. On top of that, we also have, like, if you look at the Arkham data, you can see like 9 hours ago, we had a huge amount of negative flows from Grayscale. And these all go to this BC1Q address with various endings after that. And I was looking down here to try and find what BC1Q was, and I think it's, well, look, so BC, no, yeah, BC1Q has got Robinhood Cold Wallet, it's got Bitfinex Cold Wallet, um, Tether Bitcoin reserves. Yeah, so I don't know where this is going. Like, so I don't know if those are cells on Grayscale, or if they're just. It's hard to know. Like, I think the Arkham data set is transfers, so it doesn't necessarily mean it's a cell. It could just be a transfer from Grayscale to another Grayscale wallet or something like that. So it makes it slightly hard to judge. But again, if this is the case, I mean, firstly, the price hasn't moved much given all that selling, but that's kind of going to be interesting. I'm interested to see if that's reflected later in these data sets. So here on this data set at the moment on Grayscale, we've got negative 42 million, which would be just not even one of these. Um, so yeah, that's kind of interesting, and yeah, I might go and hunt for Grayscale's actual data from Grayscale itself and see what that shows. And then again, this data source doesn't have anything on Grayscale for yesterday, so I'm not sure. But that's interesting behavior, at least. Like, it's a behavior I haven't seen before from Grayscale, and the only thing I would say on that is I saw similar behaviors in, there's more down here even. I did see similar behavior from BlackRock, which again later didn't show up as sells, but similar, apparently negative, but it didn't show up as sells later, and that was when we were at the highs, and or close to the highs, and it was before some significant drop anyway that I saw a whole bunch of BlackRock red on here, um, whatever it meant, and then we had a big drop. So just be a bit careful of that, because yeah, it means something's going on in the background, even if we don't know exactly what it is. Unfortunately, I can't show you walls at the moment because Trading Light is apparently not working. The liquidations are just above and below, like depending on what time frame you look at. Like Bybit has a few more at the 96 and a half mark, and then if you zoom out to the monthly, so we see a lot of the run up. Not surprisingly, we've got loads of liquidations below. Um, all the way down here now. And again, there's a whole bunch underneath that low at 84k. So again, that's why I'm not inclined to necessarily have an entry higher at this stage. Now, I'm possibly being too negative, or not too negative, too bearish, or not bearish because I don't necessarily say the prices are going to go there. But looking at the low time frame chart, there's a few other considerations for if we're going to maintain this range. So um, just to show the sort of the confluence. So back to the lower time frames, these are the two entries that I showed you on the higher time frame chart. Possibility, so taking out the stops into this daily demand down here, 61 fib, or the 8 hour right at the base there that hasn't been tested. Um, and also bear in mind from this, again, like I am, if this plays out, I am potentially still bearish because we are coming off a monthly supply. But the monthly supply hasn't yet broken or tested 3 monthly demand. And Bitcoin can be awkward like that. It doesn't have to test like it can just not test zones below. Um, so we need to see. But at the moment, we're still obviously holding this range. Decent drop yesterday, but then bounced straight back up again. And again, just took out the high. So we haven't taken out the high of last week. So again, you can see the entry that I had there. But again, hasn't broken this 12-hour demand in here and has now made this very tight daily demand. So locally, I was looking for, I put another entry that I'll show you this on Ether in a minute, but I had the small trend line of stops here and then this gap up to that next zone. So I've got an alert there for, possibility of a swing failure over here if we do make another push higher. And then also that there's an hourly zone there that hasn't been tested previously. And then obviously there's heaps of zones above that haven't been tested. So we're just going to push up higher. The next one would be that 2 day. And again, there's another, I think weekly. I need to look at where the weekly highs are and the more significant highs rather than just every high going up this move upwards. But again, yeah, so it's just a question of if we are going to push higher into this zone, how high we're going to go. And for me, we are at a point of looking for shorts, but there is no short confirmation. So sorry, I was going to say, so the other thing I noted last week, and again, that we had this CME gap that was left here on Tuesday. So this up move on Tuesday, we became in the hour that CME was closed. So we have the CME gap here, and this is consistent for both Bitcoin and Ether. So what can happen is that we could come down and just take out the lows of the range, come into here, this is an hourly, 2 hourly demand here, come into here, close the gap, and then reclaim the range. So that's something you can look for. So I would be looking for shorts around here, and or if we break higher at this point, probably if we break higher. But if there's any structure that's given here, to look for shorts. But then just be conscious that this may give a bounce, and then we may get a swing failure of this low from last week. And then closing the gap. And because the gap's a Tuesday, I don't necessarily consider it as good as a weekend gap. While I still think it's likely to close, it doesn't have to close immediately. Um, I think the weekend gaps are more likely to be support or resistance because it's the daily open, or it's the weekly open or the weekly close on CME. This Tuesday gap isn't. Obviously, it's just a Tuesday gap. So I don't necessarily know if it's going to act more as support. However, from a structural perspective, when we do look, we do have this, like I said, we have this 2 hour demand in here. We have this move up. It's come down, it's tested, it's tested the top of the wick, but it hasn't actually tested the body of that candle. So we can, just range through here and potentially hold this level. And I think there were some liquidations. Let me just go back to that liquidation chart quickly. Lower time frame one. On Bybit, I'd rather be on Binance, I think, just while we're on Bybit. So, no, so there's no real liquidations on Bybit, and we need to go a little bit higher time frame. There's a lot above there on the 24-hour chart. Um, so yeah, there are some liquidations just above 92 on Bybit, and let's see what Binance is showing. Yeah, so there's no real significant liquidations for it to go for here, at least on the lower time frame charts. The more significant ones are above. Let's try the weekly again quickly. So it's a little bit lower, yeah. So I mean, there's just the more significant liquidations are coming in below 90k. So there is no particular liquidation draw in that area. I mean, there's just liquidations throughout, really. But yeah, that would be something to watch for a lower time frame potential long entry around this area. And then, like I say, those two shorts above, if we are just going to we can quite commonly just do a 3 hits to the high. So we've got 2 hits there, and it could do a third hit, come up into here before rejecting. That's possible. But as always, just watching those the zones, the higher time frame zones, and the lower time frame price action as we get into the zones. And yeah, so it's still possible we push from here, but we're in monthly supply, so I'm just not biased in that direction. Don't know if there's really much more to say on that. I don't think CME and Korea aren't really giving much more. Korea had this sort of slightly weird gap here where I think it lost. What did it lost? Well, I don't know, maybe lost a day of price action in there. No, it's Sunday and Monday, where it's got a gap anyway. But as a result, this weekly isn't really a good. I mean, it's stopped here, so I wasn't really, was a bit loath to put it in. But because it's got this gap, I'm not really sure exactly where the weekly is. It does have some stops. It hasn't quite taken stops above that high, so again, could get a little bit more of a push here. Could get a push up to take out that supply. So, or into the higher supply there. So I think if it does that, let me see how that aligns with. I mean, that would be broadly structurally where the US dollar pair is now. But that'd be something to watch again. So if we do push up, maybe when Korea gets to this 3 day, where is the US dollar pair? And it could well be at this next level up by that stage, or at least taking out some of those stops that I talked about above. And that's lower down. Anyway, we shall see. And yeah, it's harder to judge at this stage. I'll just throw in another line at the top of this weekly. If we do take out the weekly at the 99,480 mark, there's a lot of people saying 100k. It's a nice round number, so again, that could be a reasonable place to look for short entries. Yeah, so and then US dollar dominance. So again, no change on this since my update last week that I was still mulling over as to whether we're doing a similar pattern to this. We've got this, and we're just going to do a test up into there. Um, or, oops, or potentially, if we're still just going to run, excuse me, that was the wrong one. If we're still just here, and it's still on, it's taken out that low, so we're just on a lower low here. But again, it hasn't had a significant close below that low. So at the moment, it's still broadly in an uptrend. But it's obviously weakened off a lot, but there is a possibility it makes a higher high here. So again, it was just looking for what are the reactions in these zones as and when if it revisits. Alternatively, is it just going to fall off a cliff from here? So from a confluence perspective, again, these would align reasonably well with those two entries that I've talked about on Bitcoin. So the only thing I'm also concerned about on Bitcoin, and it's much clearer on Ether, but is this structure. Um, so this is a common structure that I've talked about many times before. Bitcoin does it less commonly. Um, but this is, where we come up, we triangle, we don't take out any stops, and then we just distribute straight through that zone on the way back down. So that is my concern on this. So yeah, just be conscious of that. Um, right, onto Ether. So Ether, I can show that much more clearly. So Ether again it hit my alert actually, but didn't quite hit the level. So I'll show you on the lower time frame in a minute. Um, but let me just show you I'm just taking the drawings off quickly. So this is a pattern I've talked about a lot. So as I just said, we've got this. I think I even drew it maybe in the last video. Got a feeling it should be in here somewhere. Um, no, just the bars patterns. Feel like I drew it somewhere anyway. But yeah, again, as I just said on Bitcoin, it's that structure coming up, triangle, and potentially distributing through the level. So I have put entries on this. This has made weekly demand in there. So there are 4-day demand, 5-day demand, a weekly. But I have put two possible entries or alerts on this if we do come down for a retest. But yeah, so I was going to show you on hide the drawings. Um, So it was a pattern I mentioned here. So again, we came up, we triangled, we went up, we distributed back through it. So again, you can see the similarity here to here. Um, exactly the same here. Bounce, triangle, retest not so high this time, straight back through it. I think there's quite a few of these on the chart. Um, Even arguably here, it's a lower time frame, but with lower time frame would look similar again and then distribute straight back through this zone. The difference now is that we do have a weekly demand, so that's why I have put an alert on this. It also did take stops just before on this wick, but again, it's not really definitive. It's broadly made equal lows. So while I've got those possible entries in there, I do think they're risky entries. The other thing I can't clarify at the moment, I had this big circle here because there were a bunch of walls between 1080 and 1180. Um, Last I looked, those walls have been pulled out. So since we've had this pump, the walls have gone. Um, but unfortunately, I was trying to check that today, but let me see if I can load this now. Because Trading Light isn't loading, I can't check whether I can't confirm that, whether they are still out. It's obviously not going to load for me right now. Um, anyway, so yeah, that might not be valid anymore, and it's not necessarily a draw on price if they're no longer there. But yeah, so I mean, really on this, we're just looking for are we going to get a higher low? So I don't like the structure of this locally. However, we do have a weekly demand. So I think it's, and we're on this 2 month demand. We've taken out stops from below here. There are various reasons that this can go up from here. So we come up into, but again, hasn't broken supply. So, and I'm seeing this on a lot of alts as well, that while everybody's going super bullish, in some cases, yes, they have, and I've talked about this, these trend line stops that we see on a lot of alts. And in some cases, yeah, they have run through a lot of them. Um, but in the case of Ether and in the case of a lot of the majors, we're still under, this is a weekly that was already tested, but we are still under supply here. So while we've made a weekly demand, it's not the best one because this is a tiny candle. It was more of a consolidation. Um, but until it gets past this supply, this is still weak demand. So that's also another counter thing to taking longs there on if it retests. If we go up first and we take out supply first, then obviously that becomes a much more viable long entry. Um, so yeah, nothing more on that, I don't think. And Ether's still looking a little not too bad here. It's still looking like it wants to push a little bit. It's made a daily demand um, on all of the pairs. It's not the strongest one, but it's a bit stronger than the Bitcoin one, so it's still looking for a little push. Um, and I had reset that alert because the wick went just very, very slightly short of the level, or maybe it went to the 5 day, but not quite. I was like 5 day weekly in here. It also didn't close the CME gap because it happened at the weekend, so we still have this very small gap there that potentially could get closed. So looking around the 1900 mark on that. Actually, it's a little bit lower than 1900, or 1860, 1880 on that to see if we get a reaction. And then similarly, we've got the weekly a little bit higher. So yeah, there's decent confidence on this. I wanted to see those stops taken out. That was what happened. We do also have a gap here where we haven't tested the 3 day supply above. So again, still, and as I've said before on Ether, there's still heaps of entries, heaps of zones above that haven't been tested. And so this, if this does want to run, it can really run. So again, similar to what we're seeing on some of the lower liquidity alts. Light a cigarette. But yeah, so we're just watching each of these zones as it comes price comes into it. And these I had aligned broadly with the fibs. They're not perfect. I was actually hoping for a little bit more of a dip, and then the fibs would have lined up a little bit better. But you get what you get. So I don't know if that still means we're going to come back down. But I'm just not overly comfortable with this being the bottom right now. And maybe I'm wrong, we don't have it in that much chart history to look back on, but it is that structure that we're used to seeing with this triangle and then distribution back through the zone and then potentially making the higher low. And that's why I'm kind of going with, okay, we still potentially could get a bounce in here. So yeah, sorry, when I say that we could distribute back through that zone, it doesn't necessarily mean we'll make a lower low. I can see, back here was the top, so it's a little bit different, but it made a higher low for at least a little bounce, and then it did, in this case, it did take out the low. In this case over here, it just came back for a test. So it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to make a lower low. It just means I'm slightly more conscious of looking for longs in that new weekly demand that's been put in. And again, on Ether, just from the higher time frame perspective, if we do just run up from here and we don't get any of the lower time frame swings that I'm looking for, my preferred is this 26 area. So I think it's just below the bigger 61 fib, but it's a 3 month supply. So again, I'm not particularly bullish on Ether while we have this 3 month supply above us. Only sure it can go higher in there, but that would be the initial level I'd be looking at, either taking profits on longs or starting to look for shorts in here. And anyone who's been following me knows that I have this sort of bigger picture, the double top, weak demand, pattern that I'm looking at from a higher time frame perspective. So in Ether's favor, I guess, is the Ether BTC pair, but again, it's still early days. Like we keep talking about this, I've talked about this so many times. It was hitting, had monthly zones, 3 monthly zones all through here, and it just gave little bounces, little bounce, die, little bounce, die. And now we're kind of really at the last hurrah point, on this weekly demand, retesting this old 6 monthly level. And we've started a little up move. It's actually, it's two green candles, which is more than we've had since when's that, February. Um, and But we shall see, because again, it hasn't gone anywhere. It hasn't gone past supply. We're still in this 5 day supply. We're still kind of really bounded by that 3 day there. So even it could come up to 0.02 and still be not looking good. It's made a 2 day demand, is coming off that. So I guess you can start looking at this again. But as always, be conscious, that we've had these bounces before. It's not a significant bounce so far, and that it can still come crashing back down again. We need to see some proper strength, like we saw back here, for like really thinking this is going to be a reversal. And we've seen much bigger strength, as you can see, than we've had so far in this little mini run. And maybe you're, early to the party. If you're an Ether believer, then maybe this is the time for you. The ETH dominance pair also. So I think ETH dominance looks slightly, it's similar to charts of this, obviously, but it's slightly worse off. It starts kind of somewhere in here, so it doesn't have this history back here, but it has just taken out this low. So again, that could end up as a swing fail of the dominance. If that's a thing, I don't know if you can really have a swing fail on a dominance chart, um, and pick up from here. So there's maybe some hope on this. A lot of people are calling for alt season, and it's possible. Like there's certainly pros in there. And yeah, so not much more to say on that, I don't think. Just go back to the low time frame. Um, I should also say there is a tiny bit of buying on the ETFs on Ether. Finally, not for I don't know. I can't. I need to look at the history to see if we've ever had this much buying. 64 million, 100 million, 63 million the last 3 working days, mostly from BlackRock. So I guess that's kind of potentially interesting if it was worth keeping an eye on this to see if this is going to pick up. Again, presuming the lower reliability of the data that I've said before. So from a lower time frame perspective, um, basically the similar to Bitcoin from a levels perspective. So as I said, I've alerted this weekly level in there in case it gets bounced, just purely because it's a weekly, but while recognizing that I don't like the structure very much. Then there's also an hourly just below here that hasn't been tested if it was to go down and take out those lows. Let me put a level in there. And then obviously monthly below that, or 3 monthly level below that should be dropped from there. Similar to Bitcoin, the CME gap is at this 4 hour level here. So again, if we go up now, we come down, we take out the low of the range, similar to what I've just said earlier. If we come into here and reclaim the range, then something that's a trade you can look at. So if you want to be more aggressive, like look around the 1700 level when this closes, and then from a short perspective, as I said, we just came just short of the level that I wanted there. And I've kind of put the alert back in saying, it might still reject at that level. There's also this hourly inside there. Again, if we just kind of going to do this 3 hits to the high scenario, should probably also look at actually what the extension fib is, where the 113 is. So the 113 already came in for that. If I do the more recent wave, still a little bit lower. So the 113 is pretty short on there. The 127 if it went up to my arrow. But again, still looking in this area for the possibility of shorts. Again, knowing that we're coming from a 2 month demand and from the sort of various stop months of the lows, so can now start running up from here, but want to be short biased until I actually see a proper high low put in. And then, yeah, as I've said, we had that 3 day level up there. So some more immediate levels, if we're going to get reactions on the lower time frames, then it's not just going to take off. 3 day zone, should I say, in at 1980. And I think I did put in the alert, just I want this to kind of reject quite quickly if it does come in here, because it does have these little trend line stops that it could just run through all of this if it wants to. So at this point, I don't think you should be trading any shorts blindly, any of the zones that I give. You're just looking for that reaction in there, and anything on the lower time frame. The only other probably last thing I'll just do on this video is the indices, because obviously we do have that general match to trad by. It decoupled a little bit last week. So while we had, let's just look at S&P, while we had this drop here, when was it, last Monday, Bitcoin did hold. And then since then, I think Tuesday, then we started following again. So now the lower time frames are back to kind of matching, but whether the higher time frames, I'm not sure. This is a little bit mismatched. Again, on the indices, we did get these weekly demands put in, and like in this case, I've alerted at the daily inside the weekly, or a 2 day inside the weekly here. But again, similar to Bitcoin, these are not strong demands until we can see they're tested and until we see it can make it through supply. These at least, I've had an alert go here for S&P on this daily yesterday. There's a weekly a little bit higher inside it, which I think was already tested. Let me just check. Yeah, it was already tested. And then we've got a monthly here. So, if this wants to run all the way up through to this monthly supply at the top here, then obviously Bitcoin's if it's going to follow, is likely to make an all-time high. And then, on the way down, if these hold in this weekly zone, then it's likely that Bitcoin's going to hold in the weekly zone. So those are just things to kind of watch for your confluence. I think Nasdaq is the same. Yeah, the only thing on the confluence thing is that I'm slightly off on with that hit on S&P is that so Nasdaq hit the equivalent zone last or 2 weeks ago and already had the rejection from there, and also didn't hit my long entry. And contrast, S&P hit the long entry at the low, but haven't hit the short entry at the high. So the stocks are a bit, from a confluence perspective, are a bit off at the moment. That doesn't mean this is not going to reject here again. It can come up from a second test and still reject. Also has a weekly demand, also has a 2 day inside it. So we'll see on Nasdaq. But yeah, some of the other indices I think have a little bit of space. So I'm just not convinced. At least this S&P one, it is less likely to reject immediately based on the confluence with everything else. So while we can, everything is in, to some extent, not everything actually, but the key US indices are kind of broadly in supply or close to supply. I think Russell could get a little bit of a run from here. Nasdaq is just on a second test. Dow is on a second test, but again, it's got some space if it wants to go up to the 2 week above. So yeah, we just need to see on these. And I think we've got a bit of news today. Get the news. So 29th, we've got Jolt's job openings, which is at 9 p.m. my time now, which is 3 o'clock in GMT or in Lisbon time. So that, and I think we've also got NFP on Friday. So can expect some action with NFP, and then we're going to have some action on the Japanese yen and things like that this week. So see what happens in the Jolts job openings later today, and if that is going to have an impact on the dollar and or on the indices. I'm certainly seeing some expectations still that the tariffs are still going to bring indices back down again, but this is not my strength on the fundamentals there as to whether it's over. So on the indices, I reiterate that they virtually all had hit these major zones or had come very close. So again, and the indices are awkward because they can come very close, and then as I would normally do, I would wait for it to come back for a swing failure, and then they just don't come back for you. So the fact that S&P, and I think the Dow, the Aussie, maybe one or two of the others hit, I can't remember exactly without checking, all of them hit the zones. Oh, Nasdaq hit the annual zone. I think S&P slightly front ran, and a couple of the others slightly front ran. So while I would normally wait, or commonly wait, for things to come back if they have front run, and the indices are less inclined to do that. So I don't necessarily know, and maybe the bottom has been put in, and these are now just going to push back up again. I need to start to test the sort of monthly and weekly supplies above, and then we're going to see if we're going to go into a recession. So yeah, anyway, that's just a quick update for you, and hope that is useful. Don't think there's anything else more I want to say. If you like my content, please like and subscribe. Please follow my Telegram channel, and if you're welcome to jump into Telegram chat if you have any questions or requests. I still haven't looked at the majors yet. I kind of keep glancing back at them, but again, they're sort of similar to Bitcoin. They're kind of awkward, and they're in either local or high time frame supply in some cases, but then have but most of them have these 4 day and weekly demands below. So it's really just a question of waiting for things to come down, so much the same as ether that we're saying here. It's just a question of waiting for things to come down and seeing if they do hold these zones or not. We're still in the larger downtrend. But is this a corrective move off the larger downtrend, which is going to continue the downtrend? Is it a corrective move which is going to go into sideways consolidation, or are we now just bullish and we're just going to go back into all season up only season, which to me seems the least likely option, but you never know. Crypto can be a law unto itself. As always, I just say trade long in demand, short in supply, don't long tops. Even if you're going to get FOMO if it does go up from here, but just remember your risk to reward. And like I said, if you want a long here on Bitcoin, if you're getting FOMO because you've missed this whole move up, just wait. At some stage it will come back down here, even if it goes to 200K first. But even then, your risk to reward isn't necessarily good. So If you're a trader, you can trade the low time frames, and see if you can get in and get a tighter entry. But yeah, that's up to you. You need to be really studying the chart to be able to do that. But yeah, good luck and happy trading. Have a good day.